Welcome. It's the agenda here on the Blood Red channel. Myself, Guy Clarke, and Matt Addison here to talk through some of the latest Liverpool transfer gossip and all around a Fulham teenage sensation. Yes, we've been here before, of course. Harvey Elliott having made the trip to Anfield 2.5 years ago, and following perhaps in those footsteps could well be young Fabio Carvalho. We're going to talk through the Fulham youngster, what he's done in the Championship so far this season, and how concrete those links to Liverpool really are. Matt, first things first, though, how long has this player been on your radar? It seems to, this second half of the last week, it seems to kind of have erupted this transfer rumour. He is a young teenager whose contract is ticking down. And as I said there at the top, very similar to the situation that Harvey Elliott once found himself in.
Yeah, I think that's an easy comparison to draw, isn't it? I think it's a path that Liverpool have looked to a few times over the last few months, as we'll get into. And I suppose in terms of being on my radar, it's been a few months really that he's kind of been linked to the extent of it would make sense for Liverpool. Obviously, Paul Gorstart, a Liverpool correspondent, has now reported that Liverpool are monitoring. They are sort of interested in making a move for him potentially. Plenty of other clubs interested too, but I think it was around sort of September, October time that the first sort of murmurings of possible Liverpool interest might have come out. And it centres basically around two things. Obviously, one is a fantastic player, and that's obviously first and foremost a key thing for Liverpool to think about. But the other thing as well is his contract situation. I know earlier in the season, Fulham have tried as best they could to get him to sign up to a new deal. I think, if I'm right, at the moment he's sort of in the middle of sort of changing between agents. So that's obviously something that will come into it. You'd imagine one way or the other that will determine whether he stays and extends or decides to move on. But yeah, that's the other key thing I think with this is that it wouldn't necessarily be a transfer fee if Liverpool waited to the end of the season, which again, it sort of ties in with what Liverpool's strategy is, doesn't it? It's the perfect sort of opportunity to go and get what would be a bargain, a player who would cost, I suppose, 10, 15 million at the very least if you can get him for a kind of tribunal fee. That would be an FSG type move, I would say.
Yeah, we'll get into that and kind of talk through how Liverpool have, in many ways, I suppose, exploited that kind of youth market, certainly over the last couple of windows, and how well it seems to have been working. But at 19, he'd be kind of at the top of that age bracket of that kind of recruitment Liverpool have been doing, and crucially already has first-team experience, Portuguese born, hence the surname Carvalho. Came over to Fulham. He's been in their youth ranks for quite some time, did previously spend some time at Benfica. And I think that the first thing to outline in terms of the player is just technically a very, very exciting prospect.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have seen more of him than I have, to be honest, in terms of being in the Championship. I know he's got Premier League experience as well, obviously, with Fulham the season before that. So, yeah, I mean, it's a player that makes plenty of sense. I think it's important that he's got that kind of experience. We mentioned Harvey Elliott before. That was a big thing, I think, in terms of Liverpool being able to judge how good a player he is, because you can look at him and say, well, Harvey Elliott had played a couple of league games. He'd played in the Carabao Cup. It's obviously, even more the case here with Carvalho because he's sort of 3 years older than what Harvey was at the time. So I just think it's something we talk about with Liverpool a lot in terms of they want to be able to have a decent sample size to be able to look at. They want to know pretty much a guarantee that this player is on the right track and is on the right path. And, he's played 16 Championship games this season. The only reason it's not been more than that is because of injury and then getting COVID just before Christmas. So there's clearly a talented player there. And, frankly, it's as simple as if he's putting up those sorts of numbers, 7 goals, 2 assists in those 16 games. You can kind of start to go, well, if he's doing that at 16, at 19, it makes sense that as he moves forward and develops and grows, and obviously that would be even more the case at Liverpool if he was to step up. It just makes sense, doesn't it? It's logical that if he can do that, then what can he do in 2, 3, 4 years' time?
Yeah, it's one of those as well that ticks so many boxes, doesn't it, in terms of being an England youth international, as I say, albeit Portuguese born, but he's English raised. He's come through the system at Fulham. He would be homegrown. It ticks another one of those kind of quota boxes. And just looking kind of through some of these numbers, 33 goals in 82 games at youth level for Fulham. It's the kind of player that Liverpool have created a knack now of going for. Think of the likes of Frauendorf, of Musialowski, Kaide Gordon, of course, who played in midweek against Arsenal in the Carabao Cup, and Bobby Clarke recently, who joined. These wide forwards who can get goals. It's almost as if, whether it be the recruitment team, Jurgen Klopp himself, FSG, whoever it is making these decisions at Liverpool, that the eyes are on getting that next Mane or Salah into the building as a youngster and not having to pay a huge transfer fee further down the line, and this be a player who really gets ingrained and soaks in all of what it is to be a Liverpool player and the standards expected, having been able to see those guys in training.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really important to have that body of evidence of being able to score and assist and come up with those numbers, because so often with young players, we sort of see the highlights of them. You see the little tricks that they do. They might be able to beat a couple of players, but then the end product isn't there. But obviously for Liverpool, with Salah and Mane in the first team, with players lower down, it's going to be a big burden on those players to be able to contribute in terms of the goals, the assists, the creativity. If you can't do that, you're not going to make it at Liverpool. So obviously it's promising signs of what he's been doing so far. And, you know, as you say, it's a long list of players that can kind of play in all of the forward positions. They can play left, right. They can play as a 10 if Liverpool want them to. Probably can play through the middle as well if they had to. Prefers to play wide. And I think in a Liverpool system, it would be one of those two wider options, a Mane or a Salah type role that he would play. But the fact that he can do two or three different things means obviously it's going to give him more opportunities to play because he can fill in for more than one player. But it's also an opportunity to mould that player into basically what you want them to be. If you've got an idea of Harvey Elliott, for example, who's come in kind of as a winger, is then translated into a midfielder, there's obviously, you know, a couple of years extra for him to develop and for Liverpool to look at him in that sort of way. But if you bring these players in young, they've got that versatility. You can kind of assess them and do what you want with them. So, yeah, it's always something that Liverpool are looking to do. It wouldn't be a massive surprise if they went and got this player as well to add to that list. I mean, the other thing as well is it's just so low risk, isn't it? We know that that's what FSG want. They want, you know, young players to come in and make potentially money in the future. Even if Liverpool were to bring him in for a small fee, a small compensation fee, I mean, the worst that would happen is that you develop him for a couple of years, he does all right, and then goes and moves somewhere else and you make money on him. So in all ways, I think it makes sense for Liverpool to be there in terms of being able to attract him. And of course, the fact that there is Kaide Gordon, Bobby Clarke and all the rest, that just is complete evidence really to the player that there is that pathway there. I know, you know, in the last few days, Marco Silva, the Fulham manager, has been speaking about him and kind of saying, well, you know, it's kind of out of their hands to a certain extent. It's, you know, a player that they obviously want to keep, but if a big club comes in, it might be one of those that they just have to say, well, you know, it is what it is. But he made the point really that you need to be really careful when you're that age, that you go to a club where you are going to get minutes, you are going to be trusted, and you know, there's no better club, I don't think, for being able to prove that than Liverpool. We only have to look this week at Kaide Gordon, Harvey Elliott before him, so many others. The opportunity has been there in the past. There's no reason why it wouldn't be there in the future.
And it feels as though kind of the next evolution for Liverpool is really kind of have that conveyor belt of elite, young, talented forward options who can. And I think one of the really interesting things you saying there, Carvalho, certainly through his youth days playing in wide forward positions at Fulham this season, pretty much exclusively played as a number 10 in the first team. He's 7 goals as well. He scored 3 in the opening 4 games of the season. As you say, that kind of middle period so far, the autumn of the season really disrupted for him through injury. But in the last 2 games he's played, he's scored 3 more goals and chipped in with another assist. And I suppose that is one of the real interesting prospects, isn't it? Whether it's Carvalho fitting the mould of what the blueprint is going forward for Liverpool, but rather than maybe individually look to pick out the next Salah, the next Mane, who are complete specialists in those roles. And we've seen it with Diogo Jota so far, haven't we? Have fluid, interchangeable forward options. each of whom can play in a variety of roles. And I suppose you throw Harvey Elliott into the mix of that. He's played in midfield already, but wouldn't be beyond it to even play, whether it be on the right or, as we heard last season, playing as a false nine at Blackburn.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it just lowers the risk, doesn't it? The more of these young players that you've got, the more likely it is that one of them will be the next one to go on and take those next steps. I mean, you can never guarantee anything with a young player. We've seen so many times, players have got this sort of goal record at youth level and it hasn't quite happened. Harry Wilson, I know, is one of those examples that is obviously at Fulham now. So there's so many players that you kind of look at and think, will they be able to translate it? Will they be able to get to that next level when they go up to the senior team? But, if you've got kind of 5, 6, 7 of them, you'd fancy at least one of them to go on and make that step. And the more of these that you can get in, the more that you can kind of stockpile. If you like, the chances of Liverpool finding one that really works and really clicks for them are just going to increase. So, look, we've seen it with Harvey Elliott. I'm pretty certain we're going to see it with Kaide Gordon as well, because he's just such a special talent. But, there's plenty more examples as well. And, for Liverpool, if they can get a player of that caliber at this age for a cheap fee, that's the way that they've got to go about it, isn't it? They can't go out and wait 2, 3, 4 years for him to develop and become a 70, 80 million pound footballer if he is to become that. I mean, if they're going to get him, they're going to have to get him now, because you look at the other teams who are linked. I mean, Real Madrid, West Ham, Tottenham, loads and loads of others, I'm sure, are taking a look. I'm sure there's clubs in Germany as well, given the Jadon Sancho and all of the others that have gone over there and done well. I mean, if Liverpool are going to get him, I think it's got to be now, because we've seen so many times they've maybe missed out on 1 or 2 of these players, them being interested in the future, and the price tag has just rocketed. So, yeah, plenty of reasons to think that he could go on and be another one of those players. But Liverpool really have to think about doing it either now or in the summer for that to be the case.
I was going to say, when you say now, it kind of feels obviously there is the natural window in the summer, if that's the end of his contract, pay a compensation fee and go to tribunal. Obviously, has happened with Harvey Elliott, which I think a lot of people would think would kind of have muddied Liverpool's relationship with Fulham. And this is another thing that it ties in and feels as though this is something that could happen, is Liverpool at the moment seem to kind of be doing deals with certain clubs at certain times and keeping an eye on those kind of players coming through. We've seen it obviously with the Red Bull kind of model, I suppose, rather than any specific club, the Minamino and Konate deals that were done. And I suppose with Harvey Elliott coming in, that had been off the back of Fulham being relegated again, his contract ending. He'd made it clear he wasn't staying at Fulham. So there's kind of no grievance, I suppose, to Liverpool for how that happened. It's let the tribunal settle the fee. Fulham obviously want as high a fee, Liverpool as low a fee as possible. But then you factor in, you mentioned it before, the Harry Wilson deal that was done in the summer, the fact that Liverpool said, have the player, you can have him free for a year, pay us next summer. And Fulham, the way it's looking as though they could well go on to secure promotion back to the Premier League. It feels as though actually, even maybe in this window, possibly, could Liverpool utilise those relationships they've built up with Fulham to try and tie a deal up, rather than be in competition with a number of other clubs in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, I know from speaking to Paul Gorst, the words at Anfield and people he speaks to all the time, the word is fluid in terms of Liverpool's transfer targets. And if they decided that Fabio Carvalho was the player that they wanted to go for, if they decided that he was obviously the right fit and the right price, and they could do it this month, I think it's something they would definitely look at. They would look to exploit that relationship, of course, with Fulham, because, as I said before, there's going to be lots of teams who are interested. I think if Liverpool can show to the player that they're so keen that they'll pay now rather than wait until the summer, I think that would be a big thing, and it would just get them ahead of the pack, wouldn't it, essentially, in terms of the other clubs that are going to be chasing him. So I think that's not something that can be ruled out. I think there's an argument for Fulham as well to sort of do it now, because then they can kind of set that price tag themselves. There's possibly a chance that if Liverpool were to get him this month, they could then loan him to Fulham for the rest of this season anyway. So it wouldn't be like they missed out on him in any way. It could be, a situation where Fulham decide actually, whatever the price point might be, 7-8 million that Liverpool might choose to pay now might be probably more than what they would get in a tribunal. I think for Harvey Elliott, it was about 4.3 million that they got for him. Obviously, Fabio Carvalho is a couple of years older, slightly more developed, and has been there longer as a result of that. So the price tag could be a little bit higher. But Yeah, I think for Liverpool, it could make sense to do it. For Fulham, it could make sense to do it as well. And it's just a case really of how interested are Liverpool. They're obviously monitoring. Do they decide that he is the one? And if they go for it, will it be now or will it be the summer?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Could well be some January business to be done at Liverpool after all. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Of course, we'll keep you updated here on the Blood Red channel, as well as, of course, across over on the Liverpool Echo website. Paul Gorst, as ever, the man on top of all of the latest going-ons at Anfield. But from myself, Guy Clarke and Matt Addison, thanks for joining us here on this edition of The Agenda. It's bye for now.